Hello, this is Eric, and this is a follow-up or a part 2 to my previous video where I implemented some color personalization into Pewter. I finished that video with this PR. Since then, Sam added this comment and mentioned I could have used CSS variables and modified them on the root pseudo element. So in this video, I'm going to investigate making that change and figure out what these CSS variables are going to be, what level of granularity we're going to have in the theme customization. Using this approach, we won't need to use document.stylesheets or the CSS style sheet class like I was doing before. I'm going to start off with just one CSS variable, so verbatim the example that Sam suggested, and then after that I'm going to break it down into some smaller variables after I decide what level of customization we're going to have available in the settings menu, which as I've been thinking about it, it turns out that's not a trivial decision. I started off changing style.css. I've added the root pseudo element and the pewter window background variable. And then I had to add this variable into window head in its background color, window sidebar, taskbar, and then interestingly enough, I didn't realize these were here, but there are also entries in this supports block. So this is to set the alpha or the opacity to different value if we have the blur backdrop filter. We can add a little bit more transparency because if you don't have the blur effect, you can't add as much transparency, otherwise things start to look a little confusing. At least I assume that's why that was done here. So that's something we might need to account for in our considerations of how we can customize themes. The updates to theme service are relatively trivial. First, I need to get the pseudo element root. And I can do that with document query selector :root. I can get rid of CSS style sheet. For now, I'm just going to comment it out because everything will be done by changing these variables. Then I can replace this call to replace on the CSS style sheet with this .root.style.set property, and Copilot really wants to do this for me. It wants to set this hue property. For now, I'm going to set pewter window color, which is what we decided to do. It might be pewter window background actually. Yes, that is accurate. So pewter window background, and we're going to set it to this value. And I believe that will work as is. So let's try it out. I won't need to reload the server because this changes only on the front end. And if I reload the page, it seems that we are still able to change the colors. So that looks like it's working. I've made some changes to make the color settings a bit more granular. So we have hue, saturation, lightness, and alpha separated. And then I also have individual settings for window head, sidebar, and the taskbar, which will default to whatever the primary sort of complex color is set to. I also set some differences in supports versus in when backdrop filter blur is supported versus when it isn't. So for example, the taskbar here uses the regular alpha value, but if I am able to find .taskbar outside of this supports block, which is here, I have a calc function. So if you don't have the blur filter, the transparency is only going to go to a certain limit. And the reason for that is if I were to set the alpha on this to 0, you can still distinguish pretty easily between the UI element and outside of the UI element given the backdrop filter. But if I were to go into this element here and remove the blur effect, it might be more clear when we do that with sidebar as well, that frankly looks terrible. If I were to remove the override background color from this supports block, we'll see that now the minimum background color is something a bit more reasonable for when we don't have the blur effect. And I can still slide the alpha bar from the bottom to the top. Um, I didn't quite get that right on taskbar, it looks like. So that will be something to investigate. But that's the general idea. Now that this is working how I would like it to, I added a UI menu for this called personalization, and we can hit change UI colors. So this is a lot better than just having this dialog always show up when we launch the UI. And this is what those changes look like. So I had to change UI window settings.js, add the this is the menu button that appears on the left over here. Added the personalization div here, which is the way this one's built is just appending a bunch of stringified HTML. So I um, followed that pattern. If I wanted to do use the DOM API here, it would actually be a little bit difficult. I'd have to make something with an ID and then somewhere well below all this code, after I know everything's been initialized, hook into that or get a reference to the element that's created. So that's not really worth the effort. It makes a lot more sense to just do this here, like how it's already done. And then this binds the click event to that button, change UI colors, and I just open UI window theme dialog, which I already wrote, so I didn't have to change any of that. I just had to add a an action to open it from this new settings item. Conveniently, this icon with the paint palette was already there. This part is really exciting. I just added the saving and loading for the color settings. It turned out pretty simple so far, but I'm about to test it for the first time. All I did was add a read for this file. This file might not exist, so I fail silently if it doesn't exist. Then I attempt to parse the file, and I display an error if the JSON syntax is wrong. This will be really helpful if somebody goes and edits that settings file manually to see an alert. And then if there was some data to load, and it has an object called the colors, I just set the state the same way that happens when you update the settings through UI window theme dialog over here. And then I reload everything, or I set all these properties. So now it's time to test it for the first time. Go to personalization, change UI colors, and look at that, it made the file. That's a really good sign so far. One thing I think I need to add is a debounce. If I look at the network requests here, when I go and change the color, it's creating a lot of requests. And what I've noticed happening is I don't actually get the color at the end that I expect to get, because one of the previous saves is actually overwriting one of the future ones. So for example, if I try to set this to purple, and then I go and reload the page, I'm still getting this yellow color, and you'll see a lot of these requests failed. So a debounce, I think, would be a very useful feature. I'm going to implement this debounce as a cooldown. So if you stop changing the color for a long enough period of time, that's going to be when it actually saves. I have implemented this cooldown now. I called it a debounce earlier, but that's kind of a funny terminology for it because it's not a button. But implementing this cooldown in JavaScript is really easy. You just create a timeout and you keep clearing the timeout and recreating a new one every time the action occurs again. But if the cooldown time is ever passed, it's going to execute this function, and in this case it writes to the file. So we can see that in action here. If I go into settings, I keep sliding the hue slider around, but it'll only be when I've stopped sliding it around for a second that it actually saves the file. If I reload this page, it's going to be cyan in color, which is pretty neat. I just showed Nariman this PR, and he made the really important observation that there's no button to reset to default settings, and that's really important. So I'm going to work on adding that now. The first thing I need to do is I need to find a button that I can add here. I'm going to take some existing button for reference, and oh look, there's one right here. So I'm going to look at where that's implemented, figure out like what classes and such it's going to use. That's in UI window settings. I have to search for personalization, and there's a change password button here. So this is, I guess, what buttons look like. They have class button, um, and then this is a class that's just unique to each option here. And this is why I saw change password. Okay, I need to fix that comment. Change UI colors button. Although that comment is kind of redundant because you can see that in the code. I digress. This button needs to be added to UI window theme dialog. And I'm gonna keep using this pattern that I've been using before because I want to see how far it goes, how long it continues to be useful for. Because nothing else in the UI is using this pattern yet. On change doesn't make a lot of sense, right? It's going to be on press. That's what we're going to call that. And it's going to be, we'll just put a callback there because in these ones I referenced an existing callback for each one, but there's only going to be one button to reset the settings. This won't work. I can't just empty the state object because theme service is going to use the spread operator over here in the apply method just to apply whatever values I give it to the state, because I wanted it to be possible to have other kinds of theming values and not have to ask theme service every time what the other ones are when you want to change just a subset of them. To do this, I think we're going to have a reset method on theme service, and we'll just call that every time the button is pressed. And then theme service is going to replace its values with some defaults. We don't have any defaults yet, so I'll just have it store the defaults. Default values. I'm also going to have it remove the settings file when it's reset. So we'll implement that here. State equals. Now, did I make that a constant, or I can put that up here for the moment. Yeah, we'll reload it, and then we'll call pewter.fs.delete, and we'll remove that file. We'll do that asynchronously. I called the function to create a button here, but I have not yet made the function to create a button. I have slider here. I'm just going to put button over top of it because it's easy for me to read that code when I'm over here. And buttons have, at the very least, a label. L is going to be like that. Copilot, I think, just did the whole thing for me. And I think it did it correctly. We have class button, button block. This is like a bootstrap-esque kind of class. I don't know if that exists here, but maybe it does. We'll see. If I go to change UI colors, it did not like that. And the reason it didn't like that is hopefully in here somewhere. Oh, right, yeah, we're destructuring label of undefined. That's because I never passed anything to this. Label I18N reset colors. C, D, E, F, G, R, reset. So we're looking for RE, restore, E is before T, T is before, T is after N. And that was underscore. Settings, personalization, change UI colors. We do have a reset colors button, and it does work. Now we can see if it removed the file. I have hidden files shown, so that's a good sign. Just for good measure, I'm going to do an ls-la here, and it looks like we've reset the colors. So when I reload, I'll have the default settings, and if I go and change the colors again to something cool, then once again if I reload, I'll get my theme back. Well, as of the end of recording this video, this PR is now merged. So if anybody wants to play around with this, now's a great time to do that, and it will probably end up in the production pewter.com in the near future. Thanks for watching.